David Thompson and his polar bear, and we're joined now by the Energy and Climate Change Secretary, Ed Miliband, and the former Chancellor and founder of the Global Warming Foundation, Lord Lawson, who is in Oxfordshire. Welcome to you both to the Politics Show. Ed Miliband, first of all, does it worry you that among many of the poor people and those we spoke to there in Lye, that frankly they just don't see the relevance of climate change to their immediate lives?
It doesn't surprise me, because we've got a huge challenge on climate change. We've got a challenge to convince people that it's going to be good for our economy, which I personally think it is, because actually if we get a deal at Copenhagen, for example, the world is sending a clear signal about our economies moving towards low carbon. That will create green jobs in various new industries, and we've got to make it fair, which is what the people in your film insisted upon. So we've got to make sure the energy companies don't fleece people. We've got to make sure that, particularly for the poorest members of the population, they're protected from rising energy bills. So there's a mountain to climb on this globally and nationally, John.
But you know, you put up, say, a penny on the price of fuel because you want people to drive their cars less. That is a regressive tax. It will hit poor people harder.
Well, that's why we have to make it fair. You're right about that, and that's why.
And how?
Well, for example, we've got an energy bill which is going to go through the House of Commons, I hope, in the next few months. That is introducing cut-price energy on a mandatory basis for the most vulnerable customers. It's introducing tougher regulation, because we need tougher regulation, in my view, given the upward pressures there are going to be on energy prices.
And Lord Lawson, I was talking there about fuel poverty to Mr Miliband, and you said in an interview, I think that the ordinary bloke has an instinctive sense that it wouldn't be too bad if the weather warmed up. Is that really the answer?
Well, it's not in politicians' gift to decide whether there's going to be warmer weather. But, I mean, there's plenty of evidence that warming will bring benefits as well as maybe disadvantages. But may I just
to the developed world?
Let me say this, because you made a mistake at the beginning. You called my foundation, and I'm very grateful to you for mentioning it. It's an interesting new think tank, the Global Warming Foundation. It's not. It's the Global Warming Policy Foundation. And that is important, because what I'm concerned about is the extremely damaging and harmful policies which are being put forward ostensibly to try and deal with the problem of global warming. These would cost an enormous amount. They would cost far more than any good they could conceivably do, and it's particularly damaging for the developing world, where people are in direst poverty and suffering from malnutrition, disease, and premature death. They need the fastest possible economic development to get them out of this, and that means using the cheapest form of energy, which for the foreseeable future will be carbon-based energy.
Ed Miliband.
The problem is, Lord Lawson, is that you are trying to spread doubt, where in fact there is as close as you get to a scientific consensus. What we've heard from the national academies of the 8 leading industrial countries and the 5 leading emerging countries like China and India is that global warming is man-made and it's happening. And as for the developing world, the IPCC, the UN body charged with looking at this, says that 1 billion people will face water shortages, an extra billion people, if we don't act on climate change. So I have to say to you, I think you are being profoundly irresponsible by saying we can stick our heads in the sand and just hope this thing goes away.
Okay, Lord Lawson.
No, I think what is profoundly irresponsible is to say that dissent should not be tolerated, that honest, rational, reasoned debate is unacceptable. That is wrong on any issue. It's wrong on this issue, and it's wrong on any issue, and I think Mr Miliband, on reflection, ought to be ashamed of himself.
Ed Miliband,
let me just come back on that.
No, I want to talk about the language that you use, and you can answer that point. But, you know, you've called people who didn't, as flat earthers, environment saboteurs, siren voices. Isn't that terribly arrogant to use that language when people have doubt and scientific doubt?
It's not arrogant. Lord Lawson is not a scientist, and nor am I. The difference between myself and Lord Lawson is I'm willing to accept what the scientists are telling us and then say politicians need to act. I've read Lord Lawson's book. The point is that he basically wants to mislead people into somehow suggesting that the science isn't clear on this. And why is that so dangerous? It's dangerous because, as your film from Stourbridge showed, this is difficult, and it does require difficult decisions, and spreading doubt when the scientists are telling us that the science is clear is, in my view, irresponsible.
Lord Lawson.
There are eminent scientists. I'm not a scientist. I don't pretend to be a scientist, nor is Ed Miliband, as he says. but there are eminent scientists on both sides of this issue. Indeed, the most eminent scientist, climate scientist probably in the world, the professor of atmospheric physics at MIT in the United States, endorsed my book. But as I said again, I am not on the side. Even if the science is as Ed Miliband thinks it is, these policies will be infinitely more damaging than any benefit they could possibly bring.
And Ed Miliband,
that is the problem.
And Ed Miliband, in the Evening Standard, you wrote an article and you talked about the doubters, and you said we should ignore them all. I mean, that just sounds like, look, don't listen to people like Lord Lawson, don't listen to anyone who disagrees with you.
No, listen to the scientists. Look, the thing I don't understand about Lord Lawson's position is he genuinely saying that there is a conspiracy involving the national academies of Russia, India, China and those other countries. And as for the damage, I come back to this point and I'd like to hear his answer to it, which is the UN body says 1 billion extra people, mainly in the developing world, will face water shortages if we let climate change carry on. I don't know what Lord Lawson's answer is to that.
And Lord Lawson, let me just add another quick question, if I might, myself, which is, do you believe that climate change that is taking place is man-made?
Everybody knows that, well, climate change, of course, or global warming, to be more precise, appears not to be happening at the present time. There's been no, and this is accepted by all the scientists, although there is now doubt about the whole of the record, the whole of the science, because of the problems arising from the emails, traffic among the scientists at the Climatic Research Unit.
It's a very clear point. It's a very clear point, which is it happening or not? It's been asked a very clear question.
No, there has been no further warming. There was a little bit of warming in the last quarter of the 20th century, 0.5 degree centigrade. There's been no further warming since then, despite the computer models predicting there to be an acceleration.
Lord Lawson, sorry to come back to you, but let me just ask you. Let me just ask you a question. The Met Office...
There may well be further warming.
The Met Office, the National Environment Research Council, the Royal Society have all said that this decade there has been warming compared to the last. I'm more willing to trust them, frankly, than what politicians have to say.
No, you're completely misinformed. You're completely wrong. I was on a radio programme, a BBC radio programme, a few days ago with your actual scientific advisor, Professor Watson, and he agreed with me that there'd been no further warming so far this century.
And just in terms of the whole thing about the emails, the row at the University of East Anglia, hasn't that been deeply damaging? It may not change the reality of climate change. It certainly changes the politics around climate change.
Look, I think it has been damaging because I think that people want to use it to somehow sabotage the talks. My answer to it is maximum transparency. Let's get the data out there. The people, and that's what the Met Office are going to do, the people who believe that this is happening, that climate change is happening and man-made, have nothing to fear from transparency. OK,
both of you, we must leave it there. Grateful to you. Thank you very much for being with us. And if you want to find out how clean your own constituency is, all the details and the Experian map are on our website.